instructions for doing a proper haga'ala. Haga'ala, it's kelim. It's a kashering of dishes through the method of using boiling hot water. So, what's to discuss, really? You can do it at home. There's two forms of... Some people, you do the hagala sometimes in your own home. Sometimes there's a public, a communal sort of gathering where they have professionals come. They're not quite professionals. Sometimes you do have to pay to put your vessels into that communal kashering setup, because it takes money to pay for the gas and for the water and for the labor. Someone else does it, but you can do it in the comfort of your own home. There's always one problem when I usually do it in the comfort of my own home, because I have a rabbi close by that can supervise, make sure that everything's kosher, who studied a little bit. Yeah.
How do you get the water?
Water either from the sink or there's bottles underneath the table.
How do you heat it up?
How do you heat it up? You turn it. You push the button on top. You see the button on top of the kettle? That's it. There you go. Thank you. So the biggest problem is the biggest pot, but it's also your solution. In other words, what you want is you want to immerse all your vessels into a pot of boiling hot water. So, but most pots are this size, and you have a few pots of that size. They won't fit into another pot. So basically, you find your largest pot that you have, and everything else you can put into that one. You boil up some hot water in it, and what did we say yesterday? Put in a little bit of soap, just in case. And you wait 24 hours before the vessels have been used. And then you put them into, you boil up the water till it gets to be boiling, bubbling. And then you put in your cutlery, you put in your smaller pots, everything that fits in. It doesn't have to all be at the same time. This is not like the mikvah. The mikvah, everything has to be immersed and the waters have to be touching all parts of the body or the dishes at the same time. It's not the halacha by kashering. You could do one half of the pot, flip it over, use gloves, hopefully, because you'll get burned, and then put in the other half, or a third, it's fine. You can do it piece by piece. And so you can fit everything in. All you're left with is the biggest pot itself. The biggest pot itself, it's not going to fit into itself. So what do? How do you kasher the biggest pot? So I'll explain. And then, let me just finish and then I'll take your questions. The biggest pot, what you can do is fill it up to the top. And isn't that good enough? The problem is, what about the outsides? What about the upper rim on the top of because sometimes soups will spill over. Shalom. Sometimes, whatever you had in the pot, whatever taste you're trying to get rid of, whether it's non-kosher or whether it's chametz or whether it's milk or meat and you want to switch it, you won't be able to do hagala because the entire vessel. So you could say that the outer sides, the bottom's not a problem. We talked about why the bottom's not a problem, because it's being burnt by the fire and whatever taste it absorbs is by spills. But the outer sides of the pot and most importantly, the upper rim of the pot is not going to get any boiling hot water. What you have to do is cause it to spill. Few methods to cause it to overflow. Obviously, if you're doing this at home, you overflow the pot, it'll put out the fire, and that'll maybe cause gas to go. So you quickly have to turn off the gas. If you do cause it to spill and it puts out usually it starts to sizzle and for a little bit there's bubbles, but that's not so bad. The point is, as long as you turn off the gas quickly, and then once it dries off a little, you can light it again and continue the process. But how do you cause the water in this biggest pot that you have to overflow? Because the trick is it has to be overflowing while it's bubbling. It only kashers itself and other dishes too. This is something you have to be aware of. When you're putting in one vessel after another vessel, it always has to be bubbling. Usually when you put in a cold vessel, it cools down the water a little. Put in another cold vessel, another fork, another spoon, another dish, another pot, small pot. It cools down the water. So you have to space it out. Let it reboil itself. It's only going to be working when it's bubbling. You have to have boiling. That's not enough to say boiling water. It has to be boiling, bubbling water. So how are you going to get boiling, bubbling water to overflow and reach all of the rim of this biggest pot that you have? A few practical suggestions have been made.
Use a lid.
Use a what?
Use a lid.
The lid will not cause overflow. You need it to overflow. You want the waters, the bubbling waters, to be spilling on the rim, all sides of the rim of this pot. So what do you suggest?
Bring it to a rolling boil, because then the water expands slightly because of the air bubbles in it.
Okay.
Usually,
Over.
not uniformly, not enough for you to say that it's.
Put like something-
Fill it to the top, of course. You fill it to the brim, bring it to a boil. You need a little bit more to make it overflow. What do you do?
Use like a small, I don't know, in my house in America, I sometimes use like a cup or something, just something very small that's not going to impact the temperature, though, just make it over.
So you're right. It's got to be small because otherwise it'll affect the temperature and bring it down and won't be bubbling anymore. And the only problem is with small things, and if it's a big pot, it won't cause it to overflow on all the sides of the rim.
Oh, I make sure that it's like almost overflowing anyway.
So
If it's
two
not, I add
systems.
water.
Two systems. So what I do, and what I think is a very practical solution, is that I have a second vessel, or you know what, I usually use a kettle, just like the one over there. Ezra, the water boiled. Thank you. Just hint. Fill me up, please. Any tea bag. Thank you. No, I asked him before, you weren't here, but sometimes you forget. You turn on those kettles and then they boil and you don't notice. So and then they cool down. Uh-oh. How can you use a kettle? So obviously what I'm suggesting is that you boil up a separate kettle. It has boiling, bubbling water, and you pour it in. You've got a lot in the kettle. That's going to cause it to overflow. You could even pour, as long as that water has become joined, so then that overflowing, bubbling water will be on all the rim. You can basically pour this boiling hot water, as long as it connects to the water that's in the pot, it'll be like the pot is overflowing, and it is essentially overflowing water. Only problem is, what if you have it not connected or it cools down? Because once you pick up the kettle, it stops being boiling, bubbling, because it stops. So what I do is I hold the kettle. Yeah, thanks. Perfect. Thank you so much. Great job. And just throw it in. It's fine. It'll mix on its own.
Filter
Okay.
slightly.
That's very hard with boiling water. That's tough. So the way to do it is you use your kettle. Can you bring me the kettle, Ezra, once you're up? I want to use it to demonstrate. Oh,
I'm just
I guess.
curious, is there rough edges? Do you not feel the hotness from the liquid?
Thanks.
Well, it's still hot.
It's still hot. Perfect. So you notice that on the top of the kettle there's a button, that's what activates it. And then there's a mechanism in here that when it starts to boil, there's a sensor and it turns it off automatically. If I suggest using a glove because this thing does get hot. If you keep your finger down on it, it won't, or if you open the lid, that mechanism won't turn it off automatically. Because the way the sensor works is that it senses, I think, pressure. And the pressure only builds up when you have the lid closed. So you can keep the lid open, it'll boil out until there's no more water left. It'll keep on boiling. That's exactly what you want. You want to have boiling, bubbling water. So one option is keeping the lid open. If you don't want to keep the lid open, just keep your finger on it, and it won't pop up because you're not letting it pop up. And again, if you're using a glove, it's better because it won't burn yourself. And then as long as you have your finger on it the whole time, it will not pop up and you'll have your boiling, bubbling water. The problem is, in this type of kettle, it only works, it's connected to electricity through the base. So you have to hold the base attached to it while holding this down, and then wait, but it's a very short cord. So I use an extension cord. So I use an extension cord and I carry around the base together with the kettle, and then I pour it into my bubbling pot on the fire, and I add boiling. This is not boiling now, but I add boiling hot water, bubbling water from the kettle, and that's the way you get it all the way around the edges of that biggest pot. All the other pots you don't have to. You just put them in one by one, little by little, into the biggest pot. But the biggest pot, the only way to kashrut it is to get it to overflow. The way to get it to overflow is the system I just used with the kettle. There's another system that Rabbi Menachem suggests, and he thinks it's a little bit better. And that is you don't use one of these electric kettles. You use a small pot. And you heat it up, a pot that has a handle, hopefully. A pot that has a handle. And there the entire pot gets hot, a metal pot. It's bubbling water. And very quickly you take it off if you have two flames on the stovetop, one's right next to the other. You take the one that's the smaller one, and you immerse it with the boiling hot water that's in it. You immerse it, you put it down into the bigger pot. Of course, water displacement. The waters will get displaced by the boiling hot pot with the boiling hot water in it, and then the whole thing will overflow. And that's bigger than, you're putting in a heated little mug. You suggested using a mug to make it overflow. Well, the mug will cool it down. Here, it won't cool it down. It won't cool it down because it's already preheated. In the day, when all the books that were a little bit older then, they didn't have kettles like this. What they suggested is using a stone that you heated in a fire, boiling hot stone, and you hold it with tongs, obviously, and then you put that into your almost full pot, and of course that'll bubble up the water, and it will cause the displacement of the water to the rim, and that's the way to do it. That's the hardest part of kashering, is to get this the rim of the vessel filled. Yeah, please. Please. Okay, now I'll take questions. We'll go around the room. Yes, David.
Could we not, you were saying how we doesn't have to do all at once, it's not like mikvah. Could
True.
we not take the biggest pot, find a smaller pot, and just dip bits of that edge into the boiling water after having
If I
done?
already use a large baking, like an aluminum baking sheet, or like
But
aluminum
it doesn't
cake
have to be
tin.
all at once, so you have a small pot here.
I know.
Go ahead.
I'm using an aluminum baking sheet that's like really big, even though it's not very deep. I put that on the stove, I put the pot in it, and I just kind of roll it around so I get all the sides.
Oh, the rim, an upside down rim. You're saying you can get the rim done.
Yeah, I can get all of it in a big.
It doesn't,
baking sheet,
right?
yeah.
But you're right. That works.
And it seems
Both
a
of
lot
those suggestions would work.
So,
Not necessarily, but yeah.
so in that big pot, right? Let's say you're doing multiple dishes or multiple pots in that bigger pot.
You put them in, take them out.
Same water, right?
No problem, as long as it's continually boiling. Or it cools down. You boil it up again. When you're doing the hachshara.
But if the assumption here is that there's an actual transfer of flavor into that water, right?
Ah, yes.
Okay, so how is this any different than like a bucket, like a rolling boiled soup or something like that? Like,
No different.
okay, but you can't kosher.
You could kosher pots in your chicken soup. Well, you'd be ruining your chicken soup because you're putting in a milky pot, and you'd
Okay,
be.
but would you be?
If it's parv, doesn't matter. It's fine. Whether you put some vegetables in it, yeah, sure, you can kosher in vegetable soup. But why?
No,
Why would you want to do that?
No, you understand my question though, right?
Yes, I do. Let me explain, because it's actually a good question. Many poskim said, how does this mechanism work? Let's think about it. You boil up a pot of water and you say that, okay, the taste that's absorbed in the sides is going to be released into the boiling hot water, right? The boiling hot water sort of draws it out. What's going to stop it from jumping back in? So that's why some people say you should actually put it in quickly and take it out quickly. don't give it a chance of that taste that gets released into the waters, don't give it a chance to go back into the pot. Some people say there's another solution. What's the other solution? We mentioned yesterday, is that you should only be doing koshering after 24 hours of use. Because then whatever taste gets released is not potent anymore. It doesn't matter if it jumps back in, as long as you've done the koshering process. Another solution is, we said yesterday as well, put in some soap. Whatever taste that gets released into the waters is going to become pagum, it's going to become not fit, not considered food anymore, and therefore it doesn't matter if it gets reabsorbed into the vessel. As a matter of fact, I didn't mention this before, but now I'm telling you, it's very important. The custom is, we don't flip kashrut between meat and milk. Because if you have a milk pot, and you say, I never really have a use for it. I would like to use it for meaty. Let's do a hachsharat kelim. Let's do a hagala in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the winter, whenever I want to. I can always boil up a pot of water and make it kosher. Switch it from being milky to meaty, or from meaty to milky, right? Just don't use it for 24 hours. Make sure the water's bubbling, and you put it in, you immerse it. It's kosher. You can do that. We don't do that. This is a custom because it's confusing. The only time that we allow you during the year to flip between milk and meat is on Pesach. You can use the opportunity when you're koshering your kitchen for Pesach to switch this pot, which was used for milk all year. Next year, I'm going to be using it for meat. We allow you to do that on Pesach. During the year, we don't really switch between milk and meat. You can do Haggalah during the year if something became treif. And this is important because what happens now on Pesach? On Pesach, I'll take your question, but let me just finish my point, and then I'll take your question. Let's say it's a communal koshering service. Before Pesach, you're going to see the people on the road here. They set up a big vat. All your retail pots that you have in your home will fit into that big pot. So one guy brings a milchik pot. The other guy brings a fleishik pot. And let's say they don't know if it's 24. They don't know they have to wait 24 hours. So the milchik pot's going to be imbuing into these waters milchik taste. And the fleishik taste from the other guy is going to be imbuing in these waters fleishik taste. You're making basar b'chalav. Isn't that a problem? You're trying to be a good Jew and make things kosher. Instead, what you're doing is making a soup which has milk and meat soup. And this is a problem. That's why they're always right. Make sure don't use it within 24 hours before koshering. Or what they do, what's the solution? We already mentioned it.
Soap.
They put in some soap. Everybody that sets up a communal koshering knows, just in case the people did use it within 24 hours, put in some soap in the waters. It spoils all the taste which enters it, and as we said, this is the time. When it comes out, you don't have to ask them, was it milk? Was it meat? They know themselves, and even if they switch it, they're allowed to switch it. Erev Pesach, there's the time of year that you're allowed to switch one vessel from being milky the entire year to being meaty from now on. And so this is the basics. Let's see if there's anything else we need to cover. I'll take some questions before I cover them. We're almost finished, and we can give you a step-by-step cheat sheet, how to kosher, how to do haga'alat kelim. Okay, but first I'll take the questions. We'll go around the room in this direction. Start with Hirsch.
Okay.
Tveria.
Who is we? What is this? Who are you talking when we say we? Who's this custom by? With these
All Jews. All communities.
every single community?
Yeah.
Mama?
Next question. Ben, yes.
So, why can't you take one of these, boiling water or whatever pot you want, and then just go?
Say again?
You have to fill up the pot with water. Why can't you just pour water on all surfaces?
You weren't here the other day. We talked about there's a difference between actually the level of absorption from a kli rishon, which is a boiling pot of water on the fire, and pouring onto it.
I actually was there for that. Yeah.
pouring onto it is a lower level. It doesn't reach the same level of kashering. It's true. If something was only taste was transferred to it by pouring, then you can kasher it by pouring. But
I get it. It's question.
it's a question of what level it is. Kibolo kach balto, the level of the way it was absorbed, the taste has to be released in the same level. Okay, another question. What's that? We're going to come around. No. Moshe.
Okay, so I attend the Great Weinberg yard sale, where you have, and I buy one of those pots that you said you keep on the top of the fridge with problematic kashrut.
Yes.
Or whatever.
Yes, sir.
And I see it, and you say
5 shekels, it's yours.
5 shekels, it's mine.
You say it's a
I
bargain.
buy with the intent of saying I want to make this a meaty pot.
No
Can
problem.
I do? And you said if it's been a kli rishon with chalav, you use it to make.
Only an Erev Pesach can you switch it over.
Even if I buy with the intent of saying, right, I
Yes.
want to make this.
That's our custom. That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yes.
Talking about bubbling water being
Yes,
required
yes.
for the sake of kashering,
Right.
would steam count? As in,
It's a good question. Steam counts as pouring. Go back to Ben's question.
It counts as
Yeah.
I use my iron.
So, wait.
Yes. I actually have a steamer at home. You can buy a handheld steamer, and I wouldn't use it for a pot, but for a counter, for example. How does the counter imbibe taste? When it gets spilled on. When it gets spilled on, that's irui. That's called pouring. So if I'm pouring steam onto it, most steam, I think physically, it just has to be boiling. That's what steam is. It's boiling water, right? There's a certain boiling point. So there's no reason, as long as it is hot, boiling, when it hits the counter or whatever surface you want to do, then it's kosher irui. Yes, I believe so.
So then, if you need to kasher something via pouring,
Yes.
then you can simply stick it in your dishwasher if you have one. Especially since the dishwasher also uses soap.
That's a good question. Can you use a dishwasher as
Depends.
a kli rishon? But what is a dishwasher? What you're saying, a dishwasher has an element, it has a heating element. It heats up the water independently. It takes cold water and heats it up, has a heating element. Essentially, what is a dishwasher? It's one big kli rishon ala esh. Of course, there's different stages in the cycle. Sometimes it's cold, it rinses it with cold water, and then it heats up the water. Then after the soap, or before the soap, there's different stages. But you have a good point.
60 degrees.
Yeah, it could be up to 60,
Boiling water.
which is boiling water. Yes, it's true that the dishwasher may be used. The only problem is you're not actually immersing the vessels in this soup of water, right? It gets splashed on the vessels. The water gets boiled up, but then the water gets splashed on the vessels. You're not immersing it in.
Could you not say
Technically, though, you're right. If the dishwasher were to be filled up to the top with water like a pot, then that's what it is. But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work as a immersive.
You're immersing it in steam?
That doesn't count. It's not always immersed in steam. I see your point. I don't think it counts as immersing. So really, we don't kasher using a dishwasher. I'll go back around if there's questions. Yitzchak has a-
Only 20 points. This is like Kilishini, which was a.
That's right. It's klisheni.
For Rishon it's not enough, but for me it's exactly this way of Kilishini. Not
Why do you say it's like a klisheni? Because
it's spilled on.
no, that's irui called. It's not called klisheni. It's called irui, pouring. Irui mi kli rishon. Yes, it's pouring from a first vessel.
Yes.
So anything that needs that level of kashering, it's good enough. Yes.
That's like a,
Yeah, and most of your pots, plates, and silverware. Usually, you don't use it inside a soup, and so it might be good enough for those lower levels of vessels that absorb the taste on a lower level. The other question, then I'll come back to Hirsch.
The way in which a pot or any vessel whatsoever absorbs something is
Yes.
the way it spits it out, right? That's the technical thing here.
That's true. Kibalo karpoto. That's what we said.
So for steam, the issue with steam here is that while steam technically is water at the right temperature poured on, it doesn't manifest as like nothing spits out of it, right? Like with water, you put water on a table, you can brush the water off, and that would theoretically contain all the taste, right?
After I run my steamer over the counter, it's very wet.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Very wet. Some people say that counters need a higher level of koshering. We'll get to that when we talk about counters,
Okay.
but there's room to be lenient. I'm lenient about that.
Okay, so steamer's actually okay.
Steamer creates water. It creates, it's not water as it comes out of the machine, but as soon as it comes in contact with the colder surface, water droplets are created. As long as you assume that the water droplets are, moment of contact, it retains its heat for even a second. It takes it releases the taste. One more thing I wanted to say: there is a custom. It's not always done. It's not necessary halachically, but there is a custom that after you've kashered the dishes in the boiling hot pot of water, you rinse them off in cold water. That's why you'll see in a lot of these communal kashering stands, they have this big pot, which is boiling hot water, and then right next to it they have a pot of cold water. They take it out of the hot and put it in the cold. Why do they do that? It also relates to what we said before. Just in case whatever taste it spits out, we want to make sure that it won't imbibe it back again. And so if you rinse in cold water right away, it lowers the temperature. It won't have a chance of reabsorbing. It's a chumrah. It's a chumrah. It's a stringency. If you can't do it, you could also just wipe it off. But it's hot, so it's hard to handle. It's not necessarily halachically, as we said. There's soap. It's after 24 hours, and the truth is, what you can do is actually, if you can wait and do that cold water afterwards. In other words, let's say you've got a big pot and you've got cutlery. And you don't have a basket. The best thing is to use a basket. Put the cutlery in a basket and then dip the basket with the cutlery into the boiling hot water. Shake it up a little bit so the waters reach all the parts of the cutlery, and you pull it out. Take the basket and put it in cold water. You're good to go. But if so, you don't have a basket, so you throw in the fork. Still bubbling. Throw in a knife. Still bubbling. Great. You kashered your fork, you kashered your knife. Another 10, 20 of them, it's fine. As a matter of fact, the fork and the knife, they heat up when they're sitting there in the boiling hot water. No problem. And then when you're done, the entire process, pour out the hot water, take your fork and your knife, and you rinse them off. That's fine. I said it can be done in 1 or 2 or 3 seconds, but it can be done in an hour. You can leave it in there. Of course, usually you need the space to put in other vessels after. So there's only room for 1 or 2 pots in there. If you want to do 3 or 4 pots, you have to take it in, take it out, take it in, take it out, take it in, take it out. But technically, you could leave it in there until you're done with all of your kashering, finish with the water, turn off the fire, let it cool down in the same pot. Let it cool down. And then you're able even to scoop it up with your hands because it's cold water. And then you have kosher vessels. See if there's anything else I wanted to tell you before I take another round of questions. Yeah, I wanted to give you the bottom line cheat sheet. Okay, but the question first, yeah?
So what is the actual reason why we only do Hachsharat Kelim on Pesach for the switching?
Between meat and milk, yeah, between meat and milk. The reason, I think, is to avoid confusion. I think it is quite confusing to switch something. If you'll see from use in a kitchen, that one kitchen where you have meat and milk and you're cooking both. There's also, we're going to come back to this, but there's also custom to make a mark or to somehow you should be able to distinguish very well between the milchik and the fleishik dishes. And if you're going to start to switch them in the middle, that's going to cause confusion.
What if someone is well learned and organized, and they have they're highly organized and well learned?
It will be kosher. You'd be violating the custom, but it would be kosher. You can do Hagalat Kelim any day of the year, switch a vessel from milk to meat. Through this process, it works.
So when we're practicing, I'll do it less often, and once we're more learned and organized, then maybe being more lenient and maybe we can do it more often.
No, I think you should keep the custom. Keep the forks on top of your fridge until Pesach time.
What is the origin of this custom? How old is it? Where did it?
Very old. Very old. I don't have it in front of me to tell you, but it's.
You're like Balchuva though, and like your family.
Of course, kasher it right away. But do you have to switch it between meat and milk? Right? Kashering, but from non-kosher to kosher, we do every day of the year. It's just to switch one vessel that you use for meat to switch it to milk. We only do that when we're doing it for Pesach. Yeah.
Okay. Really stupid question. So same situation described before. I buy the pot off of you. You said it was milky. I put some bacon in it, cook it up. Now it's not kosher pot. And then I kosher it
You could use it for meat.
for meat.
Yes.
So there is a
There is a loophole. Yes.
There is a loophole.
Yeah, as I said, it's a custom. The technique, the method of koshering works, but there's this custom not to switch meat into milk. But you're right. Technically, if you made treif in between, then yeah.
Would that only be b'diavad though? Or
Yes, of course, b'diavad. You shouldn't be
deliberately do it.
correct. You don't want to be cooking up non-kosher food.
Treif it up on purpose.
No, not a good idea. Not a good idea. Do you want a summary? How to do hag'alah in the comfort of your own home? Okay. How to do hag'alah in the comfort of your own home? You want a cheat sheet? Ready. Number 1. So hag'alah, or koshering by boiling hot water. Hag'alah is what it's called. Number 1 is wait 24 hours from use, from the last use of the pot. Number 2, boil up water. Bring to a bubble. Boil bubble. Boil and bubble.
Bubble, toil, and trouble.
Toil and trouble. Yes, you don't have to recite anything, but if you want to recite Shakespeare, you may. Boil and bubble water in a pot. Obviously, I suggest using a big pot, because then you'll be able to fit everything into it. But if you don't have small vessels, use a small pot. Doesn't matter. Boil and bubble water. And then 3, we said, add a little soap to the waters. Just in case you'll be taking a meat dish, a milk dish. This helps. All these things help. The truth is, you don't have to kosher the dish first, because you could even be using a treif pot to boil up. Of course, if you want to use the pot itself, you're going to need to kosher the pot, that big pot that you're using, by using one of the methods, which we're not going to write on the board. That just confuses things. Let's say you're using a kosher pot, boil up the water. While it's bubbling, you then immerse the dishes. Wait a second. Before that, number 4, excuse me, make sure that you wait 24 hours. You also have to clean. I'll put it here. And clean the vessel. Clean the vessel. Then you
Does that mean 24 hours after cleaning?
No. And then you immerse all parts, not at the same time, but all parts have to be immersed in the boiling, bubbling water. Number 5, take it out, and then you rinse, or you put in cold water. It's very simple. It's very simple.
The hagala, the word hagala.
We had it before, but I'll do it again. Problem. Hag-a-la. Hag-a-la. Is that clear? Questions?
This is
You are all
right?
diplomaed. You have a certified diploma, that kosher certification. You can now go ahead and use hagala in the comfort of your own home. Follow these rules. Mazel tov. You can make things kosher in your kitchen. All those things that require this method. There's a second method. We're going to start talking about it now, because we have a few more minutes. That is called libun. Libun, we spoke about it before, and we said we're going to continue to speak about it now. Libun. Libun means using fire. Sorry, whitening comes from the word lavan, and that's probably because it has to be white hot. Maybe that's why they use that word.
Or white could mean purity.
It could. It could. It's always good to be pure. I'll turn this off. It's a little bit warm in here. Okay, how do you do libun? There's 2, I said before, there's 2 methods. But it starts off from a debate amongst the rabbis. What is the basic definition of libun? Some people say it has to be white hot. Like we said, hot enough that sparks come out from it, hot enough that that some of the outer layer gets peeled off. It's so hot. But of course, that depends on the materials that you're using and their makeup and their composition and their sparks sometimes only come when you have different materials inside or when it gets hit. So, but some people say we're looking for that. Let's say it's 350 degrees Celsius. That's very hot. Okay, but that's what libun is. Some people say it depends. If you're using a fire which is only 200 degrees or 150 degrees or lower, how did it absorb the taste? With the fire, no water is involved. It absorbs directly with the fire. In order to do libun, all you have to do is kibol o kach polto. The way it absorbed it, that's the way it's going to release it. So if you have an oven which its maximum it reaches is 200 degrees Celsius, how are you going to kasher that oven? Turn it on to 200 degrees Celsius. It never reached 350 in its life. It can't technically reach such a heat. It would disintegrate, or you don't have the dial. It doesn't work that hot. Some people say, this is the question: is libun at the same height of temperature, which it absorbed the taste? Is that good enough just to bring it back up to that same temperature again, and to have the taste burnt out or released from it? Some people say that's good enough, but some people say no. There's an objective temperature which we translate, let's say, into 350 degrees. And if you don't reach that level of 350 degrees, it's not kosher libun. It doesn't really release the taste. And so this is the big question, whether our ovens, not the self-cleaning ones, the standard ovens, which have a limit of 200 degrees, let's say, 250 degrees, whatever, 250, whatever it is, don't reach 350. I'm not talking about Fahrenheit, I'm talking about Celsius. Right? 350 is the standard temperature when you're talking about Fahrenheit. Cooking in America, everybody knows, okay, turn your oven up to 350. But that's not hot enough for a proper libun. For libun chamur, I used the terms yesterday, repeat them. Libun chamur is the more strict, stringent, extreme, you could call it, extreme burning. Or libun kal, maybe that's good enough. Some people say it's not good enough.
662 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's a lot, 662 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe self-cleaning ovens get there, but most ovens don't. And therefore they say you cannot kasher your oven unless you use a blowtorch that reaches, was it 662 Fahrenheit? Yeah. Something like that, which will ruin your oven. And so basically you cannot kasher your oven. That's why some people have a special Pesach oven, or they buy a special, smaller toaster oven, only use that, or they only cook on the stovetop on Pesach. How much baking? You could cook almost everything on the stovetop. You don't have to use an oven. And if you can't kasher, you can't kasher. It's a machloket. Some people say that between Isur and Heter, you should be machmir, but by Pesach you could be mekel. You could be lenient. Why? Because chametz is not really Isur. Chametz is mutar, the 359 days of the year. 58, right? It's only for 7 days that it's prohibited. It's not essentially usur. It's not like it's pork. Chametz is not pork. And therefore the rules can be, it's a machloket, and the Gemara goes way back to, is chametz called isura bala or hetera bala? Did it absorb prohibited food or did it absorb permitted food? It just at some point becomes prohibited. And the rules therefore might be lenient. As I said, I believe most Orthodox rabbis say you can kasher your oven because libun kal works. It's good enough. You don't have to reach 350 degrees. As long as you reach the same temperature that you used the vessel with, same heat that it absorbed the taste, reach the same heat, it'll release the taste. So this is the beginning of the discussion of libun. Rav Melamed says you should only really use, be lenient if you have a great loss But as I said, there's different customs. I believe he's in the minority. But he does have a difference between if it's Isser or Chametz. He says by Chametz you could be a little more lenient, and maybe you could even use Libun Kal. Also, it's a big difference for pots and pans. I mentioned to you the other day, we have to finish, I know. If you have a fry pan, let's assume that you've fried up stuff without oil. There's no liquid there. The only way to kasher it is with libun. Libun chamur, taking a blowtorch, reaching it such a height, it'll destroy your pan, especially if it has a coating of Teflon. You're really in trouble. The Teflon will be ruined, and so your pan will be ruined. And so anything that must be kashered with libun, we're worried, and you're worried that it might get ruined, so we don't kasher it. Some people say you can't kasher pans, fry pans. And some people say, why are they lenient? They say because you could rely on this fact that you only need libun kal. Libun kal means you're just going to bring it to, no water. You're going to use the same temperature that it was used with. Put it on the fire. How did it absorb taste? By using it on the stovetop. Put it on the stovetop will be good enough. Or also, you can rely on the fact that it's usually used with oil. With oil, all you need to do is hagalah. Right, if there's liquid involved, so put it into the boiling hot pot of water, and that'll be good enough. There's room to be lenient when it comes to Teflon pans, which will be basically you have to throw them out or not use them after they became treif. There's room to be lenient because usually they're used with oil, and we discussed yesterday, do we follow the common usage or the extreme one-time usage? So there's room to be lenient for that, but it's more problematic than all the other vessels. You can understand now why. Last questions before the break. David?
Do you have to do all your pots or just the ones you're going to use?
Just the ones you're going to use. Yes.
Is the Gimel and Allah, is it the Gush or Rafuya?
I think it's Rafuya, but I'm not sure. Yes?
Is there any, for doing libun kals,
Yeah.
is there any amount of time that it has to take? Or like it's just,
Same question. It has to reach the hottest temperature that it was used with, just for a second.
Just for a second?
Yeah, but you have to, sometimes it takes time. You heat up the oven, it takes a while till it reaches that maximum temperature. And then once it's at the maximum temperature, we go back to the discussion, how long do you put the vessel into the water? 3 seconds. Some people say it should be longer, but the standard custom is to be lenient. As soon as it reaches that temperature for a second or two, it's considered to have burnt out whatever taste was remnant in there. Yes? Yitzchak?
Yeah, additional question. In the case of Teflon, if you know that certain temperature will destroy it, but it's still not destroyed, can you go until the maximum temperature that it will not destroy because you know already it can't be
It's a machloket. Some people are lenient, some people are machmir.
Okay.
Okay, machloket. Okay, well, I'll stop here. See you tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem. We'll have a class on it.